Have you ever woken up one morning and felt like your body was trying to tell you something? Something you'd ignored for too long? A quiet ache in the chest, a short breath on the stairs, or that uneasy rhythm in your heartbeat that whispers, "You can't keep living this way." A few weeks ago, I met a man named Steve Lopez at a lakeside trail in Tampa. He had the kind of presence that made you stop and listen. Tall, weathered, with a calmness that only comes from having stared danger in the face more than once. Steve wasn't just another retiree out for a walk. He was a former firefighter, a man who'd spent decades running into burning buildings to save others, but nearly lost his own life to something silent, his heart. He told me that for years he brushed off the warnings, the fatigue, the tightness, the numbers that crept higher with every checkup. "I thought I was just getting old," he said. "Turns out I was getting close to gone." But then, something changed. One single morning habit, something so simple it almost sounded unbelievable, began to turn everything around. Within months, his blood pressure normalized, his energy returned, and his doctors couldn't believe the scans. Have you ever felt like your body was giving up on you, only to realize you still had a second chance waiting? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. But before I tell you about the morning habit that changed Steve's life, let's go back and see how he reached that point. Steve Lopez was born in the summer of 1959, in a modest, sun-warmed neighborhood of Tampa, Florida. From the start, Steve was a restless spirit, curious, daring, and endlessly kind. He wasn't the top student in school, but he had a natural instinct for helping others. When other boys played ball, Steve was the one climbing trees to rescue stray cats or fixing his neighbor's broken fence. After finishing high school, he enrolled in a community college while working part-time at a local diner. He wasn't sure yet what he wanted to do, only that he wanted his life to mean something. But fate had its way of pushing him toward that old, buried dream. One night, during his shift at the diner, a small fire broke out in the kitchen. Most people panicked. Steve didn't. He grabbed the extinguisher, cleared the space, and calmed everyone down. When the firefighters arrived, one of them clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You ever thought about joining the department? You've got the instincts." That moment changed everything. Within months, Steve applied to the Tampa Fire Academy. The training was grueling. 5 a.m. runs, heat drills, endless lectures. But for the first time, Steve felt alive. It was around that time he met Emily, a school teacher with a heart as steady as her smile. They met at a charity event the fire department hosted for local kids. Steve remembered how she laughed when he accidentally spilled lemonade on her dress, and somehow, that became their beginning. Life soon took on a rhythm. Work, family, purpose. Steve and Emily married in a small church ceremony, surrounded by fellow firefighters and old friends. A few years later, they welcomed 2 children, Lucas and Hannah. Steve often said the day they were born, he learned what fear truly felt like. The fear of not coming home. As the years passed, the balance between duty and family became his greatest challenge. The job demanded everything. Long shifts, late calls, missed birthdays. He'd walk through the door at dawn smelling of smoke, collapse into bed, and hope his kids didn't see how tired he really was. But through it all, Emily stood by him. When Steve questioned whether he was doing enough as a father, she'd whisper, "You're showing them what strength looks like." Those were good years, full of laughter, barbecues, and family road trips to the Keys. But deep down, Steve began to notice something changing. The long nights, the stress, the adrenaline, they were taking a quiet toll on his body. He ignored the warning signs then, believing he was invincible. After all, firefighters were supposed to be unbreakable. He didn't know it yet, but the real fire he'd have to fight wasn't in a burning building. It was inside him. Every hero faces storms that don't make the headlines. And for Steve, that storm began in his late 40s. His body, once solid and strong, started showing cracks from years of exhaustion and stress. He brushed off the chest tightness and dizziness, telling himself it was just fatigue. But beneath that tough exterior, something dangerous was brewing. Around that same time, life outside the firehouse wasn't easy either. The department went through budget cuts, his workload doubled, and the pressure to stay sharp weighed heavy. Emily noticed the changes first. The nights he couldn't sleep, the quick temper, the way he'd press his hand against his chest after climbing the stairs. Then came the call that changed him. A fire in an old apartment complex. Steve and his crew saved a mother and her child, but one of his closest friends, Mark, didn't make it out. That loss hit Steve like nothing before. For months, he carried the guilt in silence, telling no one how it haunted him. His health began to spiral soon after. The first hospital visit came at 51. High blood pressure, cholesterol off the charts, and an early warning of heart disease. "You need to slow down," the doctor warned. But how could he? Fighting fires wasn't just his job, it was his identity. Financially, the medical bills piled up. Emotionally, he felt lost between two worlds. The man he was, and the one his body would no longer allow him to be. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Emily, he whispered, "I can save strangers, but I don't know how to save myself." She took his hand and said, "Then maybe it's time to learn." That moment, quiet and raw, marked the first crack of light in a long, dark tunnel. After that dark stretch, Steve tried to push forward, determined to prove he still had what it took to wear the badge. He went back to the station, took extra shifts, and mentored younger firefighters. Outwardly, he was the same dependable leader, the man people turned to when things went wrong. But inside, his body was fighting a quiet war. Over the years, Steve earned medals, commendations, and public praise. The city honored him for a daring rescue during a warehouse explosion. The kind of moment that gets your picture in the paper but steals years from your life. The adrenaline that once fueled him now drained him. He'd come home shaking, drenched in sweat. And Emily would look at him with that worried smile she tried so hard to hide. His kids, Lucas and Hannah, grew into young adults and started building their own lives. Steve couldn't have been prouder, yet he felt a growing emptiness. The house was quieter, and the man who once ran toward chaos now sat in silence, listening to the hum of his own exhaustion. Physically, the cost was undeniable. His blood pressure meds increased, his cholesterol stayed stubbornly high, and his doctor warned him that his arteries were beginning to harden. "You can't outrun this, Steve," the doctor said. "You either slow down, or your heart will make the choice for you." He didn't want to hear it. For a man who'd spent a lifetime protecting others, learning to protect himself felt foreign, almost selfish. Then came retirement, a farewell party, a gold watch, and 1,000 pats on the back. But when the applause faded, so did his sense of purpose. Steve was about to face the hardest adjustment of his life, learning how to live without the firehouse. Retirement hit Steve harder than he expected. At first, it felt like freedom. Sleeping in, morning coffee with Emily, and long walks by the bay. But as weeks turned into months, the quiet began to gnaw at him. The adrenaline that once defined his life was gone, and in its place came stillness. Something he wasn't used to handling. He filled his days with small projects, fixing the fence, volunteering at the local community center, visiting his old fire crew. Yet, beneath the surface, he felt a strange loneliness. His kids had moved away, busy with their own families. Emily noticed the restlessness in his eyes, the way he'd stare at the horizon like he was waiting for something that would never come. The years of firefighting had left their mark not just on his body, but his heart in more ways than one. His cholesterol kept climbing, his blood pressure remained high, and the occasional chest discomfort began returning more often. He chalked it up to aging, refusing to admit it might be something worse. One afternoon, while mowing the lawn, Steve felt a burning tightness in his chest. He stopped, leaned on the mower, and waited for it to pass. It did, but something in him shifted. That scare was the first time he realized how fragile life had become. Later that night, he told Emily, "You know, I've faced smoke thick enough to choke a man, but this feels heavier." She took his hand, eyes soft but firm. "Then maybe it's time to stop fighting the old way, Steve. Maybe it's time to listen." He didn't say it aloud, but deep down, he knew she was right. The next season of his life wouldn't be about bravery. It would be about surrender, healing, and learning to rebuild from the inside out. By the time Steve turned 60, life had quieted down, at least on the outside. The kids were grown and gone, Emily was his constant companion, and Tampa's mornings felt slower, softer. But inside, his body was sending out signals he could no longer ignore. What started as mild fatigue turned into breathlessness while walking up the stairs. His once strong hands trembled when holding his coffee cup. The man who'd once hauled people out of burning buildings now had to stop and catch his breath after bringing in the groceries. His doctor's words echoed louder each visit. "Steve, your arteries are narrowing. Your heart's working overtime." He was prescribed more medications, pills for blood pressure, for cholesterol, for circulation. But the side effects left him drained, dizzy, and sometimes hopeless. Emily tried to keep things light, making heart-healthy meals, encouraging him to walk with her in the park. But Steve had always been stubborn. "I fought worse than this," he'd say, brushing it off, though he knew deep down this was a battle he couldn't simply power through. At night, he'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan as memories of the firehouse replayed. The sirens, the rescues, the rush. Now, all he heard was the slow, uneven beat of his own heart. Retirement, once a dream, had become a reckoning. The stillness he once resisted now forced him to listen, not to the world outside, but to the quiet, fragile rhythm within him. That winter, his doctor warned him he was at high risk for a major cardiac event if he didn't change his lifestyle. It wasn't just about medication anymore. It was about survival. And for the first time in a long time, Steve realized he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of not living, of missing the chance to make things right, for himself and for the woman who had stood by him through every fire, both literal and unseen. The breaking point came one humid morning in July. Steve was sitting on the porch, trying to catch his breath after a short walk around the block. His shirt clung to his back, his heart pounded in his chest, and sweat rolled down his temple like he'd just come out of a burning building. But this time, there was no fire, no smoke, no alarm, just silence and fear. Emily rushed to his side as he gripped the armrest, eyes wide and frightened. "Steve, we're going to the ER, now." He wanted to protest, to tell her it would pass. But the truth was, he couldn't. He didn't have the strength to pretend anymore. The doctors ran tests, ECGs and scans. The results hit hard: severe arterial blockage, early signs of heart failure, and a stern warning. Any more strain, and your heart could stop. That night, in the dim light of the hospital room, Steve stared at the heart monitor beside his bed. Each beep sounded like a countdown. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. He thought about every alarm he'd answered, every person he'd saved, and how he'd failed to save himself. The next morning, the cardiologist came in, calm, firm, compassionate. "Steve, you've spent your life running toward danger. Now it's time to walk toward healing. You need a new routine, a new rhythm." When Steve got home from the hospital, he sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at his coffee mug. Emily placed her hand over his and whispered, "Maybe it's time to start again." just one small step at a time. That's when it hit him. He didn't need to chase big changes anymore. Maybe healing could begin with something small, something done each morning with intention, with hope. He didn't know it yet, but that one morning decision would be the start of the miracle he'd been searching for all along. After that hospital scare, Steve knew he couldn't go back to his old ways. The days of ignoring the signs were over, but he didn't know where to start. For weeks, he tried to follow everything his doctor said. Low-sodium diet, daily medication, light exercise. But his heart still felt weak, his spirit weaker. One morning, while sitting at the cafe near the bay, he ran into an old friend from his firehouse days, Tom Reeves, a fellow retiree who looked far younger than his years. Steve couldn't help but notice how energetic and calm Tom seemed. When he asked what his secret was, Tom smiled and said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." But it all started with one simple morning habit. Tom explained that after his own heart troubles, he began following a morning heart health routine recommended by his cardiologist at the University of South Florida Heart Institute. It wasn't a new pill or a supplement, it was a practice. Every morning, before breakfast, he'd drink a glass of warm water with a squeeze of lemon, then spend 20 quiet minutes doing mindful breathing and a slow walk under the sunrise. It helped his circulation, lowered his stress, and reset his blood pressure naturally. Intrigued, Steve looked up studies and found real science behind it. A 2023 U.S. Heart Association report confirmed that morning mindful breathing and light aerobic movement significantly improved vascular function in older adults, especially when combined with hydration and natural sunlight exposure. Steve wasn't a man of trends, but he was a man of discipline, and this was something he could do. Simple, grounded, real. That night, he told Emily, "Tomorrow, I start fresh. No heroics, no machines, no rushing. Just me, the morning, and a second chance." It sounded small, almost too small, but something about it felt right. The next sunrise would mark the beginning of his healing journey. The first morning of Steve's new routine felt almost ceremonial. The world was still half asleep, the Florida air warm but gentle. He poured himself a glass of warm water, squeezed in half a lemon, and stepped outside barefoot onto the grass. The first sip felt clean, alive, as if he was washing away years of neglect. He sat quietly for a moment, focusing on his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. At first it felt awkward, too slow, too quiet. But with every breath, he felt his chest loosen, the tightness ease. After a few days, he began adding a slow 20-minute walk around the block, watching the sunrise paint the sky gold and orange. Within a week, he noticed small changes: better sleep, steadier heartbeat, fewer dizzy spells. The fatigue that had clung to him for years began to lift. Emily joined him most mornings, and those walks became their shared ritual. Quiet conversations, gentle laughter, sometimes silence that said everything. Steve also made subtle changes to his diet. Oats for breakfast, more leafy greens, fewer fried foods, and plenty of berries. The combination of routine, calm, and consistency began to do what medications alone couldn't: restore balance. 3 months later, his doctor was stunned. His blood pressure had dropped to healthy levels, his cholesterol improved, and his energy returned. "Whatever you're doing," the doctor said, "keep doing it." But for Steve, the real healing wasn't just in his numbers, it was in his spirit. He no longer woke up fearing the day. He woke up grateful for it. Every sunrise became a quiet promise that it's never too late to start again, never too late to heal what's been broken. If you've ever tried something similar, share your story in the comments below. You never know who might need your light. 1 year after starting his morning habit, Steve Lopez was a different man. Not younger, but stronger, calmer, alive in a way he hadn't felt in decades. His heart, once burdened by years of service and stress, now beat with steadiness and gratitude. His doctor called it a remarkable turnaround, but Steve just called it a blessing. Each morning still began the same way. A glass of warm lemon water, a deep breath, a walk beneath the sunrise. What had once felt like a desperate attempt to survive had become a sacred routine. It wasn't about fighting his illness anymore. It was about honoring his life. He'd often meet other retirees at the park, men who looked tired, pale, burdened by pills and worry. And every time one of them asked, "Steve, how'd you turn it around?" he'd smile and say, "Start with the morning. That's where life begins again." Emily said she hadn't seen him this peaceful in years. Sometimes, she'd catch him sitting quietly on the porch, eyes closed, sunlight warming his face. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask. He'd grin softly. "About how close I came to missing this simple, beautiful moment." When his son Lucas visited with his own kids, Steve told them, "Your grandpa used to run into fires. Now he runs toward the sunrise." The grandkids laughed, but they didn't realize that was the truest thing he'd ever said. Before I left Tampa, Steve looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "I wish I had listened to my body sooner, but I'm grateful I finally did." Life doesn't always give you do-overs, but sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives you one more sunrise. If this story inspired you, like this video, and if you believe in second chances, don't forget to subscribe. You know, every person I meet teaches me something new about life. And Steve's story reminded me that healing doesn't always come from hospitals or pills. Sometimes it begins with stillness, breath, and the courage to start small. He showed me that it's never too late to rebuild your heart, your health, your hope. Thanks for listening, my friends. Until next time, stay healthy, stay hopeful, and don't forget to greet your next sunrise with gratitude.